Daniel Cross is my name. The steady hum of 18 wheels on asphalt has been my life's music for 42 years. I've transported everything from lobsters from Maine to oranges from California. From the same paper, this story may one day be printed onto the machine parts that construct cities. From behind the wheel of a Peterbilt, I have witnessed this nation's transformation. Watched as the ancient two-lane highways that formerly served as the interstate system's heart were gradually strangled by the system's growth like concrete veins. But those ancient routes stayed with me forever. They have a sense of magic and history that you simply cannot find on I-40. I made the decision to go on a nostalgic run last fall because of this. Some of the ghosts run the IT was termed by younger men. I was traveling from Chicago to Santa Monica with a little load of textiles. I also had extra time. I therefore made the decision to travel as much as possible along the fabled Route 66, the old mother route. The trip began exactly as I had recalled. The cheesy diners with their neon signs that buzzed. The dilapidated automobile courts that mumbled of a time long since past. The wide-open spaces that make you feel like the last person on the planet. The first several days of the trek were a lovely, solitary experience. I connected with the early truckers who negotiated these similar turns and hills a long time ago. Cruise control and GPS. The first hint of strangeness crept in while I was in western Oklahoma. The light spilled out across the horizon in orange and purple strokes. It was a mood rather than anything you could identify. The air became dense. There is a deeper stillness between towns. It felt like the world outside my taxi was holding its breath. True night was upon me as I pushed through the Texas Panhandle. Just 100 yards away, the beams of my headlights were engulfed by a dense, moonless darkness. This section of 66 is especially bleak. Decades ago, the interstate drained off all the vitality, leaving just a skeletal route lined with abandoned petrol stations and ghost settlements. You have to keep your foot firmly on the accelerator and lock your doors in this type of environment. With the exception of the occasional crackle of static, my CB radio had been largely silent until it started acting strangely. It wasn't other drivers' normal jumbled talk. This was not like the others. A sequence of clicks and growls that seemed to emanate from the static itself made a low, guttural sound. As I experimented with the squelch, I assumed it was simply atmospheric interference, which happens frequently enough in the flatlands. However, the eerie, rhythmic sound continued. Instead than sounding like a machine, it sounded more natural and angry. I changed the channel, but it was still there, a ghostly voice cruising the airways. I simply turned the darn thing off after hearing the eerie noise for a few minutes, preferring the sound of my engine to that of digital devils. In some ways, the ensuing silence was worse. Now that I was on edge, my mind began to deceive me. Each shadow appeared to elongate and contort. Each wind blow sounded like a whisper. I convinced myself that it was simply exhaustion from too many hours of driving. The white lines vanishing beneath my wheels had a mesmerizing effect. I served in the military. I was aware of the symptoms of road hypnosis. I turned the radio on, allowing an old rural station to fill the taxi with stories about cheap alcohol and heartbreak. Grounding myself in the familiar helps. I was someplace close to the border with New Mexico. I noticed something in the formless black emptiness on each side of the asphalt ribbon. A shape darted across the road at the extreme edge of my headlight beams. It was enormous, far larger than a coyote. It also made a low, predatory gait movement. A horn with prongs? No, it was too dark and heavy. A rogue cow? Conceivable, but it followed a speed that wasn't appropriate. I slowed, gripping the wheel more tightly as I looked into the gloom up ahead. Nothing. It vanished as fast as it had come. I scolded myself and shook my head. It was a deer. It must have been a deer, but I could still see the picture of its strong, muscular body. The drive remained uneventful for the next hour, but the sense of being observed grew stronger. It was an instinctive, primordial feeling, similar to what it must have been like for our ancestors to sit around a fire and gaze into the suffocating darkness of a primordial night. The sensation that you are not the top predator anymore. I noticed that I was looking in my mirrors all the time, glancing from the road to the reflecting glass and back. Behind me, the empty asphalt remained stubbornly vacant, but the sensation remained. I felt like my skin was itching. Then my old Kenworth's engine, which I knew more about than my own brother, started to sputter. My heart sprang at the first hesitation, which was a cough. I've taken good care of the engine. It never wavered. I tried to clean it out by tapping the gas, but it coughed once more. This time, more fiercely. My dash's lights flickered. The base of my neck started to prickle with icy, stinging panic. It was more than just a hassle to break down out here in the middle of nowhere with a dead CB and no phone coverage. It was a real case of survival. I urged the rig on, hoping to reach the next village, which my map said was still at least 30 meters away. After one final splutter, the engine died. The only sounds to break the sudden silence were the whisper of the wind outside and the ticking of the cooling metal. In a sea of darkness, I was adrift. I gave the ignition another go. Nothing. The battery was in good condition. The lights remained on. Perhaps there was a problem with the gasoline line, or worse. I reached into the passenger seat and took out my heavy mag light. In my hand, it felt rather comforting. I couldn't force myself to open the door, even though it was standard procedure to exit, put down flares, and check the engine. There was a tangible pressure against my truck's cab now, and the sensation of being watched was intense. I quickly looked about, attempting to see through the pitch-black darkness outside my windshield. And the hush was too absolute. No stir of invisible desert critters, no crickets. The whole world seemed to be waiting. I heard a howl at that point. It was not a wolf's lonesome cry or a coyote's yipping. I could feel this vibration going all the way through my truck's frame. A roar, deep and resonant, with a horrifying blend of pain and fury. The proximity seemed unsettlingly near. My blood froze. All the scary tales I had ever heard. Every late-night radio program and campfire story rushed back. I remained motionless in my chair. I gripped the flashlight so firmly that my knuckles became white. The wail was heard, opposite side of the truck. It was in motion. I made myself do something. My years of experience and training begged me to start the truck. I frantically pumped the gas and twisted the key once again. The engine coughed and turned over, but it was unable to catch. Then I noticed it. It emerged from the shadows into my headlight's intense beam. And my brain just wouldn't accept what I was witnessing. It was a creature straight out of a medieval horror. It had 2 legs. Its shape is a hideous parody of a man's. It had to have a thick, corded muscle frame and be at least 7 or 8 feet tall, discernible even through a thick layer of rough black fur. Its huge paws, with their claws digging into the ancient highway's brittle asphalt, were curved like a wolf's end. It had long, strong arms with sinister yellowed talons at the tips. The head, however. The head, my God. It was a giant wolf's head. Its long nose jerked back in a silent growl, exposing teeth like rows of daggers and gums as black as tar. The eyes, too. The worst part was the eyes. They weren't an animal's eyes. They were clever, crafty, and possessed a ferocious, evil hatred. They were staring straight at me, 2 molten gold spheres that seemed to sparkle with their own inner light. Time paused. My throat tightened each breath. This impossibility, this thing, was real. It appeared to want me to notice it as it stood motionless for perhaps 50 yards in front of my grill. It desired for me to understand what was pursuing me. It moved ahead with a smooth, frightful fusion of animal and human. I was its cornered prey, and it was a predator. At last, my mind escaped its lethargy. I was just responding, not thinking. The silence was broken by the thunderous blast as I laid on the horn. The animal did not even recoil. Its golden eyes never left mine as it simply cocked its head in a show of perverse curiosity. One step followed by another. It was getting closer. The engine would not cooperate, so I screamed in fury and cranked the key again. I yelled, "Come on, you son of a start!" into the vacant taxi. By this point, the thing was halfway to my pickup. Its muscles bunched under its hide, and I could see the individual hairs on its muzzle. A foul, musky stench of blood, damp fur, and something else was all I could smell. The cab was infused with an odorous and old substance. I turned the key one last time while holding it and listening to the starter motor whine in protest, saying a last fervent prayer. The motor caught. With a belch of black smoke from the stacks, it roared to life. The snarling snout twitched as the thing hesitated. I briefly believed that the light and noise could frighten it away. I was mistaken. With another of its trembling cries, it declared war and charged. I didn't think twice. The transmission groaned in protest as I forced the truck into drive. I had no time to increase my speed. I simply blew it away. The enormous beast moved at an impossible speed. In a few frightening leaps, it made the rest of the way. The beast didn't aim for my 40-to-9 Riggs grill, so I braced for impact, expecting it to smash against it. It leaped onto the hood of my truck with an incredible leap of strength and quickness. It had a huge effect. The cab's front shook violently, and the sound of claws tearing at the metal and shrieking was like chalkboard nails, magnified 1,000-fold. The huge head of the creature materialized in my windshield, its face just inches from the glass. Those hateful, blazing eyes gazed right into my heart. Its jaws leaked saliva and drool, leaving streaks on the glass. With a roar so strong I could feel it in my bones, it opened its lips and made the windshield vibrate as though it were about to break. A rush of pure, unadulterated adrenaline replaced the panic. I wasn't going to perish on some abandoned highway because this creature was attempting to kill me. In an attempt to fend off the beast, I began wildly swerving the truck from side to side. The trailer groaned and threatened to topple over as the rig fishtailed furiously. With unnatural power, the creature held on as it sunk its claws deeper. It lifted a single enormous arm and lowered its claws upon the windshield. Directly in front of my face, a web of fissures burst across the glass. It would make its breakthrough. It would get inside. One final desperate thought came to me. I applied the brakes firmly. It was a suicidal move. The huge unloaded trailer instantly started to swing around as the tires screamed in protest. I intended to use a jackknife. The trailer began to pass the cab, and I felt the nauseating lurch. Outside my windows, the world turned into a haze of dark whirling. However, the intended impact was achieved by the abrupt, rapid deceleration. The unexpected monster lost its balance. It fell over the side of the cab and onto the asphalt after being flung from the hood. In a cloud of dust and tire smoke, my pickup slid to a stop. The trailer blocked both lanes of the old road as it turned at a severe angle. Like a trapped bird, my heart was thumping against my ribs. I could hardly handle the wheel because my hands were shaking so much. There was silence for a while. My headlights swerved through the dust as I looked through the broken windshield, and then I noticed it standing up again. It had a limp. Even though I had heard it, the limp seemed to exacerbate its anger. With a deep growl that sounded like a homicide, it began to move in my direction once more. I didn't hold off on seeing what it would do. After struggling to shift into backward, I slammed the accelerator. With a rearward lurch, the truck barely straightened out. I put it in first gear and drove away. Before gaining traction, the tires whirled on the loose gravel. Just past the location where the creature was standing, the truck roared ahead. It attacked as I passed it, tearing deep gouge furrows in the metal as its claws swept across the side of my cab. The noise felt like a bomb detonating next to my ear. I didn't turn around. With my knuckles white on the steering wheel and my eyes focused on the road ahead, I pushed the engine harder than I had ever done. With my head spinning with fear and incredulity, I drove like a man possessed. I didn't slow down. I failed to look in my mirrors. All I did was drive. On the horizon, I at last noticed the hospitable warmth of lights. Tucumari was the town in question. The first truck stop was well lit, and I roared into the parking lot. A couple other drivers were milling about when I noticed my brakes squealing. I sat there trembling, breathing in ragged gasps, and killed the engine. A few minutes later, I made myself get up. I got out of the taxi with shaky legs. The other drivers gazed at my truck, then at me. I looked after them. The hood had been torn and dented. The windshield was a broken glass mosaic. Additionally, there were 4 deep parallel gouges that were scraped down to the bare metal along the driver's side, from the door all the way back to the sleeper. The marks were definitely claw marks. No animal on this planet could have left such deep, strong claw imprints. An elderly man with a seasoned face and perceptive eyes approached. He first glanced at the damage, then at my frightened, pale face. He didn't inquire as to what transpired. "The mother rode," he remarked with a slow nod. "She has a lengthy memory. They dislike it when some things are forgotten. I never made it through that Route 66 run. I took the freeway the remainder of the way after having the truck fixed, the expense of which I never fully disclosed to my dispatcher. That was the last time I drove that section of road. Those luminous golden eyes are still visible in my rearview mirror on some nights when I'm by myself in my taxi on a pitch-black highway. That wail on the wind is still audible to me. I've been on the road for 42 years, so I've seen it all. However, I'm aware of what I witnessed that night in the bleak American West. A creature caught my eye, and I am aware that it still lurks along the remains of the old road, waiting in the shadows. Was this story enjoyable to you? Tell me in the comments. Remember to like this video as well. Let's now start our next horrifying story. Linda Harper is my name. For the past 12 years or more, I have been operating a large rig. I've been advised that most individuals, especially women, wouldn't select this line of work. The loneliness, the long hours, and miles of concrete that go on forever. However, I adore it. I adore the independence, the feeling of autonomy, and the subdued dignity that comes from taking the world one load at a time. From the truck's cab, you can view the actual country, the areas that aren't featured on postcards. You pick up on the talk on the CB, the hum of the tires, and the rhythms of the road. You discover the darkness as well, a darker, more eerie form of darkness that lurks at the periphery of civilization, in the forgotten corners of the map, rather than just the physical darkness of a moonless night. This specific route was a cross-country corridor that connected a distribution hub in Oregon with a warehouse in New Jersey. I was pushing hard, making as few stops as possible, and traveling as many miles as possible since I was transporting a priority shipment of medical supplies. I was in the wide, deserted state of Wyoming, which seemed to have more antelope than people. Probably around 2 in the morning, it was late. It's the type of late night when everything appears to be reduced to the luminous dials on your dash and the bubble of your headlights. The coffee I had been drinking for the last 100 miles had lost its flavor, and my eyelids were heavy. Even if it was only for a quick 30-minute power nap, I knew I had to stop. I'm no novice, yet pushing through exhaustion is a rookie error. I turned on my turn signal when I noticed the blue sign indicating a rest area. It was one of those more traditional, older stops. There are only about a dozen parking spaces for automobiles and trucks, and a tiny brick building for the bathrooms. Encircled by a sparse row of unkempt pines, the place was completely empty when I pulled in. Only my rig and the buzzing yellow security lights that created long, warped shadows on the vacant asphalt. Not another truck, not a single car. Even though an empty rest stop at this hour wasn't out of the ordinary, I was usually a little uneasy. You're alone. A lone glimmer of life and light in a huge desert that is asleep. I parked my truck at the space farthest from the entrance, at the extreme end of the lot. My typical behavior, it allows you to see everyone entering and going. It was nearly startling how suddenly and profoundly the engine died. I sat for a while, allowing my eyes to get used to the dim light that was sweeping the room. It was dark in the restroom building. The trees at the lot's perimeter formed an intimidating black wall. There was silence. I reclined back in my chair, closed my eyes, and set my alarm for 30 minutes. On the journey, I sleep lightly. I've been trained for years to be sensitive to any odd noise. I must have barely been asleep for a few minutes when the first howl broke the stillness. I opened my eyes. My heart began to race as soon as I sat up straight. I've lived outside my entire life, both in and out of the truck. The noises of the woods are familiar to me. I am familiar with a coyote pack's high yipping call. I am familiar with a timber wolf's lonesome, melancholy cry. This wasn't either. This was a stronger, deeper sound. The air in my cab seemed to vibrate due to its guttural, resonant nature. It was not the call of an animal to its herd. It was a sound of unadulterated, unbridled rage. The roar was followed by a long, painful wail. It was also rather close. It originated in the direction of the trees that were just past the parking lot's edge. With my hands on the steering wheel, I bent forward and looked through the windshield. The forests remained a solid wall of black, but the security lights threw a sickly yellow hue over the scene. I waited. My chest tightened around my breath. Minutes went by. My own heart hammering frantically was the only sound. I began to reason. It might have been a wolf, a big one. Or perhaps a familiar sound was being magnified into something hideous by my weary head. The second howl arrived just as I was settling back in my chair to write it off as the result of an overactive imagination. This one was unique. The question was addressed. A second, equally strong and deep howl came from farther down the tree line, as the first, followed by a third from a different angle. They seemed to be coordinating and exchanging information. A chilling, oppressive fear started to descend upon me. This animal wasn't alone. They were large, and this was a pack. In the hopes that the unexpected flash might frighten them away, or at the very least provide me with a better view, I reached over and turned on my parking lights. The first few feet of the woods were illuminated by the rays that sliced through the darkness, but all that was visible were twisted pine trunks and a carpet of dead needles. The yelling ceased. The subsequent quiet was far more ominous than the sound. A predator's silence, a patient silence. I kept my hand over the key to the ignition. All of my instincts were telling me to start the car and leave immediately. Put the logbook away. Ignore the rules. Simply leave. However, I paused. What if there were only wolves? In general, they are afraid of people and cars. An enormous diesel engine would undoubtedly start them up. What if it wasn't, though? Even though those howls didn't feel natural, they were incredibly powerful. I noticed the movement at that point. It was right on the brink of the light. In the deep, a flash of movement, the shadows cast by the trees. I tried to make it out by squinting. It was low to the earth, big and gloomy. I initially believed it to be a bear, but its slinking, flowing grace was completely incorrect. It was using the wood's darkness as cover as it stalked around the rest stop's perimeter. It moved with an unusual purpose and speed from one shadow to the next. A rush of nausea swept over me. My mouth became parched. There was no bear here. There was no wolf here. The form was incorrect. It moved with a startling intelligence and was too large and elegant. On my pickup, I sensed its gaze. I couldn't see them, but it was evaluating the circumstances. They were hunting. Then one more appeared. It bravely emerged from the trees and entered the parking lot's faint yellow light. As well as the planet shook on its axis. Something plucked from the pages of a madman's notebook was the creature that stood there. It was a monstrous bipedal beast, a hideous hybrid of wolf and man. Its muscular frame was coated in thick, charcoal-colored, matted fur, and it was easily 7 feet tall. It had long, sinewy arms that ended in hands with dirty, curled claws. It had a persistent predatory stoop because its knees were bent in a canine Digitraw stance. Its head was a nightmare of eyes, pointed ears that swiveled and twitched, a long nose with yellowed fangs, and lupin characteristics. Like phosphorus blazing in the dark, its eyes shone with a faint, sickly green radiance. All they possessed was a calculating, steely hunger. With a gentle click of its claws on the asphalt, it stepped forward. It turned its head slowly and thoughtfully, sniffing the air as it looked about the deserted lot. For a heart-stopping moment, I thought it had spotted me as its eyes swept over my truck. But its eyes continued to roam around. It was trying to find someone or anything. My head was yelling, "This isn't possible." It was fatigue-induced hallucination, a waking nightmare. However, the sight of it was so clear and convincing. The way its breath froze in the chilly night air, and the way its muscles huddled beneath its hide. It wasn't alone, and it was real. Hide. It wasn't alone, and it was real, with predatory elegance. With a new rush of fear, I understood that they were communicating with a succession of low, guttural clicks and growls that I had previously heard on my CB radio. They were more than just animals. They had intelligence. They had a plan. I was confined. All that separated me from them was a thin shell of steel and glass. I was horribly certain that they would be on me right away if I made a sound, even if I just exhaled too loudly. My windshield's glass felt as thin as paper. My door's lock looked like a kid's toy. With precise and well-coordinated movements, the three monsters started to walk across the parking lot. They were heading toward the bathroom building rather than me. My blood froze. What if there was a human inside? What if these things had come while another foot traveler was out in the open? It was a terrifying concept. The green glowing eyes of the animals surrounded the small brick building, staring at the closed metal doors and the dark windows. The leader, the biggest of them, came to the entrance of the men's room. The handle was not attempted. It lifted a great clawed hand and just tore the metal apart, peeling it back like tin foil. I had to take action. I couldn't see someone get ripped apart while I sat here, even though my fear was still a firm, cold knot in my gut. Anger's adrenaline shot through it. I refused to be a helpless victim. I quickly glanced around the taxi, searching for any weapon. My eyes landed on my light control panel. Along with my fog lights, high beams, and primary headlights, I also had my powerful roof-mounted spotlights, which I utilized to navigate dark loading docks. My imagination suddenly came up with a desperate plan. I grabbed for the ignition and turned the key with a shaky hand. The night was broken by the abrupt explosion of sound as the engine roared to life. I flicked all of my light switches at the same time. An intense, dazzling white light suddenly filled the rest stop. The blackness was destroyed. The creatures were immediately and violently affected. They backed away from the unexpected glare and let out a high-pitched, unearthly cry of pain and wrath. They staggered back from the restroom building, shielding their flaming eyes with their long arms. In a quiet snarl, the leader's horrific face turned to confront my truck, its fangs gleaming in the bright light. Our gazes locked for a horrifying instant. I observed a ruthless, murderous intelligence in addition to animistic fury. It was angry and knew what I had done. I didn't give it time to become better. The truck's tires screeched on the asphalt as I put it into gear. I made no attempt to leave the parking space. I simply stomped on the throttle and pointed my rig's nose at the entryway. A 40-ton battering ram of light and noise, the truck roared forward. With that same strange speed, the creatures scampered off, jumping back into the tree-ine's shadows. One of them, a dark, ephemeral shape in my peripheral vision, sprinted parallel to me for a few yards as I sped toward the exit. It was attempting to interrupt me. When I swerved in its direction, it abruptly turned around and vanished into the trees. I didn't even bother to look for traffic before I jolted into the highway. With my eyes fixed on the rearview mirrors, I pressed the pedal to the ground. I only noticed the quickly fading lights of the abandoned rest station for the first few miles. I believed I was secure. I believed I was safe. Then I caught sight of them. I noticed two sets of green eyes that were glowing in my driver's side mirror. They were running in the dark just off the highway shoulder, keeping up with me. I could see my speedometer was approaching 80 miles off, and they were easily keeping up. Their eyes were burning like evil emeralds in the night as they loped along their strong bodies, devouring the earth. I was struck with a new wave of fear. They were after me. Down the highway, they were pursuing me. The noise filled the cab as I pushed the engine harder. I didn't care that the truck vibrated in protest of the speed. My mirror's eyes stayed steady and unwavering. They had not lost their position. Then one of them took a logically illogical action. It jumped. It was propelled from the shoulder over the guardrail and into the air by a tremendously strong bound. The trailer was its target. I heard the shriek of claws on metal, then a huge thunderous thump. I had it on my pickup. In an attempt to shrug it off, I began to veer erratically, just like I'd seen in old monster movies. The creature clung on as the trailer wobbled dangerously behind me. It started to climb along the side of the trailer, making a scrabbling, tearing sound as it made its way toward the cab, and then at me. Now I was yelling, a savage, primordial cry of utter fear. This was not possible. In my mirror, another pair of green eyes emerged. Still pacing me, the second creature awaited its chance. It was approaching the one on the trailer. Its shadow was going along the passenger side, as I could see. I steered the truck sharply to the right in a fit of inspiration, aiming for the concrete support pillar of an overpass that towered over us. I intended to squash the critter between my trailer and the hard concrete by scraping it off. It was a huge risk, a small error in judgment, and I would destroy my own rig, or worse. I turned the wheel just enough while holding my breath. With a grinding shriek of shredding metal, the side of the trailer crashed into the pillar. The entire rig trembled fiercely. My arms hurt from the strain as I struggled to maintain control. I checked myself in the mirror. The animal has vanished. As I passed the pillar, I saw a fleeting sight of a black form rolling into the darkness after colliding with the asphalt and plummeting through the air. Relief was not something I had time for. There was still the second beast. It allowed a cry of rage. I had heard the same frightening noise at the rest break. Then it did something I never thought it would do. It stopped. It slowed, went off the highway, and vanished into the backcountry of Wyoming. Until the sun rose, I continued to drive. I drove directly to the company depot in Salt Lake City, avoiding my planned drop-off. With my hands quivering and my body shivering from fatigue and lingering terror, I drove into the yard. My blood turned cold all over again as I finally stepped out of the taxi and saw my trailer. After colliding with the structure, the entire right side was a mangled wreck. However, 4 deep parallel gouges, each more than a foot long, were engraved into the aluminum skin right above the damage. Claw markings. That day I gave up. I informed my dispatcher that I was finished. I was unable to explain why. How could I let them know that creatures were after me? They would have assumed I was insane. I took the proceeds from the sale of my trailer and relocated to a little Arizonan hamlet. I no longer drive at night. Even being outside after the sun sets bothers me. I still have cold sweats when I wake up certain nights. I could hear their howls reverberating in my ears. I couldn't get the picture of those emerald eyes out of my head. What I observed that evening is known to me. I was fortunate to leave with my life, but there are monsters in the dark and things that stalk the desolate highways. In the dark and things that stalk the desolate highways. The name Earl Jennings is mine. I describe myself as an old-school trucker. I started driving when I was 19 years old, transporting logs from the Pacific Northwest's dense forests. I've witnessed everything, or so I believed. Fires that make the sky shine like the end of the world, mudslides that transform a roadway into a river, and blizzards that bury your rig in minutes. I'm not the type of man who gets carried away by fancy. I have faith in the dependability of a properly maintained diesel engine, as well as in what I can see and feel. Strange noises and shadows abound in the woods, but there's always a logical explanation. The wind among the trees, a cougar, a bear. Until that night on Highway 20, that's what I thought anyway. The road is a perilous asphalt ribbon that winds through the center of the Cascade Mountains. The route is lonely, particularly at night. You won't see another set of headlights for at least an hour. I was returning to the mill. The vehicle feels light and unsteady on the rain-slicked turns, and the trailer is empty. Like silent ancient sentinels, the huge Douglas firs that bordered the road were clinging to a dense, damp fog that was coming down from the upper slopes. It was like driving through milk because of how thick the fog was. My high beams are uselessly shining back at me. I was depending on my fog lights, my low beams, and my in-depth familiarity with every curve in that route. It was shortly after midnight. The typical cacophony of insects and night birds was muffled by the damp cold, and the woodland was unusually quiet. All I could hear was the low rumbling of my motor, the hiss of my tires on the damp pavement, and the regular slap of my wipers. Despite the perilous circumstances, the scene was captivating and nearly serene. My thoughts were beginning to wander, and I could feel that old road trance creeping in. I think that's why I nearly missed my reaction. On my right, a form sprang onto the road from the dense wall of trees and fog. The movements was a blur. My windshield was filled with a dark mass. My 30-year honed trucker's instincts took over. I should have snapped the brake pedal when my foot slammed into it. The wheels were locked up as the air brakes shrieked and hissed in protest. Without a load, my light rig started to slide. On the slippery black top, the trailer is beginning to fishtail. I struggled with the steering wheel, my mind shouting one word, my heart jumping into my throat. Elk. It's like hitting a brick wall when you hit a mature bull elk. It can kill the driver and destroy the truck. The cab of the vehicle was halfway into the oncoming lane when it slid to a painful angle. For a moment, I sat there with my knuckles white on the steering wheel and my breath coming in jagged bursts. There had been no effect on me. I hadn't noticed. I'm glad I missed it. The stench of burnt tires and hot brakes filled the cab as I took a deep, shaking breath. I tried to see through the dense fog as I searched the road ahead. I thought I would see the elk retreat back into the woods, scared but unharmed. It wasn't an elk, though. Something that had no place in this universe stood in the center of the road, lit by the swirling fog and the unsettling glare of my headlights. It was a monster, a beast, a horror. Despite being canine in shape, it was enormous, larger than any wolf I had ever seen or thought of. It could have easily passed for a grizzly bear. Its body, a massive mass of muscle and sinew, appeared to devour the light because to its shaggy jet-black fur. It had a huge, wolf-like head that was enormous and deformed, and it was brimming with a dreadful primordial force. It had not run. It had halted and looked up at me. With its 4 strong legs, it stood there, its head down and braced on the asphalt. Its chest rumbled with a low growl, a sound like pebbles grinding together deep in the ground. The sound was one of sheer, pure menace. It was upset that I had the audacity to stop it in its tracks. The scene was difficult for my mind to process. A wolf? There were no wolves that big. A bear. The shape was incorrect. It was too predatory and slender. Something different, something old and incorrect. The tales that the elderly loggers once told. The Salish tribes in the area murmured stories about woodland demons and form shifters. All of them flooded back to me. Stories I'd always written off as superstitious bullshit. The animal moved in the direction of my truck. Its eyes captured the light, but unlike other creatures, they did not reflect back green or yellow. Like the embers of a fading fire, they burned a dull, smoldering crimson. I was more frightened by what I saw in those eyes than by their size or roar. I observed intelligence. I witnessed a rational, thinking mind tainted by a calculating, cold malice. This was no simpleton. This predator was well aware of what it was. It was aware of its own strength. My truck didn't scare it. It irritated it. My multi-tonon machine was viewed as an impediment and an intrusion rather than a threat. When its enormous head was raised, its pitch-black lips peeled back to show a set of teeth that chilled my blood. They were more than simply teeth. They were daggers, yellowed and heavy, built for cutting through bone and hide. It took another purposeful step forward as the snarl grew louder. I became paralyzed. I felt a sudden electric and piercing fear. It wasn't an animal I was handling. I had a monster on my hands. Sweat-stained palms grappled for the gear change. I had to leave that place. The truck's gears groaned in protest as I put it into reverse. The tires briefly spun on the slippery road before catching as the tractor lurched rearward. Straightening out didn't concern me. All I needed was some distance. With its head tilted in what appeared to be amusement, the creature observed me. I was able to back up 10 or 15 feet. After that, it charged. I've witnessed cougars in motion. I have saw bears charging. That was not at all like this. It was a violent explosion that was confined. In 2 impossibly short steps, it covered the distance between us. A haze of evil red eyes and black fur. I didn't even have time to yell, let alone react. It leaped into the air and landed right on the hood of my Peterbilt with a startling jump of power. The effect was astounding. With a groan of tormented suspension and metal, the truck's front end smashed down. The massive weight of the creature caused the reinforced steel and thick fiberglass hood to buckle. It felt as though a boulder had been dumped from a considerable height onto my truck. With its enormous claws as thick as a man's fingers, the beast clung to the hood and tore it apart like cardboard. Now, only a few feet away, its face was framed in my windshield. Every awful feature was visible to me, including the black lips' flexics of saliva, the crisscrossed snout's scars, and the fur's coarse, wiry texture. I felt a surge of utterly primordial fear that nearly stopped my heart when its crimson eyes pierced mine. There was more to it than a monster. It was a demon, a living manifestation of the darkest myths in the forest. With a roar, it pounded the windshield with a loud, concussive burst of sound. I felt pressure in my ears as the glass vibrated wildly. It was more than anger. It was an assertion of power. I own this territory. You are nothing. My fear was so intense that it kept coming back to me in the form of a desperate, irate rage. This monster was attempting to destroy my house, my truck, and my means of subsistence. It was attempting to murder me, and I was not going to perish on some desolate mountain road, cowering in my cab. I turned on the air horn and let out a loud blast from the twin trumpets on my roof. As if to clear it, the creature flinched and shook its enormous head. It refused to let go, though. Its claws sank farther. It was furious. It smashed its head against the windshield after lowering it. Just in front of my face, a web of spiderweb cracks burst at the point of impact. For a short while, the safety glass held. I needed to remove it. I pressed the accelerator hard and forced the truck into first gear. The truck lurched forward as the tires spun and then caught. The trailer behind me began to swing back and forth as I began to veer aggressively from one end of the small road to the other. Me. The enormous body of the creature slammed into the hood's sides as it was flung around, but its claws were deeply buried. With a strength that defied physics, it held on. Once more, it let forth a yell of unadulterated rage and started to ascend. With its claws tearing long, deep gouges in the metal, it clambered up the buckled hood. It was attempting to climb onto the cab's roof. It was attempting to reach me. Just a few steps from the tarmac, I could see the thick old trunks of the trees that lined the road. My imagination flashed a frantic suicidal idea. It was my only shot, but it was a long one, a move that could have easily killed me. Out of the fog on the right side of the road, I saw a huge Douglas fir with a trunk as broad as an automobile. I aimed, kept the wheel steady, and then, at the last second, gave it a powerful leftward yank. Although the truck's front swung away from the tree, the front of the trailer and the passenger side of the cab were now headed straight for it. It had a disastrous effect. It was a thunderous explosion of splintering wood, shredding metal, and shrieking. The mirror on the passenger side was torn from its bracket. The cab's side crumpled like a can of tin. My skull cracked against the window as I was flung forcibly against my door as the entire rig trembled. The world turned black for a moment. A second later, I woke up with my ears ringing and the air heavy with the smell of truck fuel and pine sap. On the other side of the road, the truck had stalled, its front end stuck in a ditch. I was still alive despite the cab's insane tilt. The beast was the first thing that came to mind. I gazed at my passenger side window's broken remnants. The twisted tangle of broken wood was the tree trunk, and there it was, stuck between the immovable tree and the crumpled side of my truck. I had completed the task. I had removed it by scraping. It was imprisoned. The crash shattered its huge body. It remained alive. In some ways, its roars were less horrifying than the high-pitched, anguished shrieks it was putting out as it writhed and twisted. Its crimson eyes met mine, and the expression of haughty superiority vanished from them. It was an expression of raw, pure pain and fury. I ought to feel relieved. I ought to have felt triumphant. But my terror just became colder as I stared at the confined, dying beast. I had caused harm to something that shouldn't have been there. I had fought against an unknown force of nature. The thing made one last convulsive attempt and ripped itself free. It was awful to hear its own flesh shredding and bone breaking. Its body was a torn, fractured mess when it fell onto the asphalt. An inconceivable angle was bent in one of its front legs. It has a bloody, painful wound on its flank. Its strong muscles shook with the strain as it tried to stand up. After pushing itself up, it stood shakily on 3 legs. It gave me one last look with its hideous, bloodied skull. With a low, gurgling growl, it promised more retribution. Then it vanished into the dense fog, dragging its shattered carcass, and the darkness of the woodland, only the bloody smell and a silence more dreadful than any sound remained. I'm not sure how long I sat there in the cab wreckage, trembling. I became cold and shaky as the adrenaline eventually subsided. I contacted for assistance after successfully getting the radio to function. Hours later, the sun was just starting to light up the eastern sky when the state police in the tow truck finally arrived. They wanted to know what had happened. I informed them that I lost control in the fog after swerving to escape an elk. The story made sense. They nodded as they observed the severe damage to my truck's side and the shattered and scarred Douglas fir. However, I noticed the expression in the elderly tow truck driver's eyes. He was a native, a man who had lived on these mountain roads all his life. He examined the profound, non-animal gouges in the hood of my truck at the scene's extreme ferocity, and he remained silent. However, he was aware. He was aware that I wasn't being completely honest with him. My rig was dragged back to the mill. It was a complete failure. The same week I quit my job. I was no longer able to drive the road. I couldn't be alone myself in those dark woods. I moved down to the city, as far away from the dark, deep forests of the Cascades as possible, after selling my house and packing my bags. I currently operate a forklift in a warehouse. The labor is mind-numbing and the pay is awful, but it's safe. It's foreseeable. There are no twisting mountain roads, dense fog, or old forests teeming with undesirable objects. On some evenings, though, I can still see those blazing red eyes in the darkness when the rain beats on the window. That roar is still audible to me. Furthermore, I am aware that the blacktop beast is still limping through the woods. Some unholy power repaired its broken body. Its hatred for me is unrelenting. It's waiting too. Please click the like button and leave a comment below if this story made you shiver. There's another terrifying story to come. Let's go on. Terrifying story to come. Let's go on. The name Calvin Roates is mine. I'm not a lifer, as opposed to some of the older folks who are addicted to diesel. About 8 years ago, after my Ohio plant closed, I started trucking. It's a job. It provides food for my family, pays the bills, and maintains a roof over our heads. Solitude is the cost. You exchange your time for miles, and you spend a lot of that time by yourself, absorbed in your thoughts, on long, boring highways that begin to look the same. It's worst in the Midwest. The road leads straight to a horizon that never seems to get closer, and the area is a flat, featureless plain of corn and soy. It's the sort of environment that tricks a weary mind and produces mirages. This particular run involved transporting a shipment of processed pork from Des Moines to Denver in a straight line. I was running late. My dispatcher, a man named Frank, who had all the charm of a flat tire, had made it plain that making up the time was not an option after I got into trouble during a 4-hour delay at the loading dock. I was pushing it then. Fueled by stale gas station donuts and cold coffee, I had been driving for 10 hours straight. Hours had passed since the sun had fallen and the world outside my taxi had vanished into a deafening black void. Only I, the droning engine of my Freightliner, and the my headlights' slender beams carved a trail across the darkness in Nebraska. There was no life on the road. It had been about an hour since I had seen another car. The CB didn't say anything. The signal on my cell phone had gone out miles ago. The deep, debilitating loneliness was the aspect of the job that I detested the most. It's the feeling that you could simply disappear from the face of the planet and nobody would notice for days. I turned on a late-night talk program on conspiracy theories, UFOs, shadow governments, and cryptids to keep me awake. It was exhilarating nonsense, but it was all rubbish. Something to prevent my mind from becoming mushy. I was west of Kearney someplace. A mile marker sign's green glow flashed outside my window. 109. I couldn't get the number out of my brain. 109. Like a warning, it felt important. I shook my head in an attempt to dispel the fog of exhaustion. I was starting to become angry. Before Frank got my hide, I wanted to locate a location to stop and rest for a few hours. I noticed the guy on the side of the road at that point. It stood at the extreme edge of my headlight beams, barely off my shoulder. I immediately thought of hitchhiking. Idiot was my second thought. At 2 a.m, who in their right mind would be hitchhiking out here in the middle of nowhere? It was a nice way to become the focus of a podcast on true crime. As I approached, I became aware that something was off as my foot naturally eased off the pedal. The proportions were incorrect. The figure was tall, unnaturally tall, but it was stooping and uncomfortable in its stance. The night was mild, but it was wearing what appeared to be a heavy, ragged garment. With a mixture of caution and morbid fascination, I reduced the speed of the truck. Their car might have broken down. Perhaps they required assistance. You are a part of an unwritten code as a truck driver. People are never left stranded by you. However, there was something really off about this scene. What had been a faint murmur in the back of my mind all night had turned into a loud alarm. The figure moved while I was 100 yards away. That wasn't a human movement. The movement was animalistic and jerky. I was unable to identify what it was hunching over on the ground. It appeared to be feeding. A chill went through my veins at the thought. I turned on my high beams in an attempt to acquire a clear view that would either validate my suspicions or show them to be unfounded. Brilliant white light engulfed the globe, and I shall always remember what I witnessed until the day I die. It wasn't a human. It existed. Something from the darkest, lowest depths of hell. A hide of coarse, patchy fur, a sickening blend of gray and brown, was the ragged coat I believed I had seen. It stood on 2 legs, but they ended in twisted, clawed feet and were bent backward like a dog's. It was gaunt, its ribs showing through its thin hide. But it exuded a sense of dreadful strength. It had long, wiry arms that ended in skeletal hands with fingernails that resembled dirty talon. With a raging hunger, it tore at the bleeding, torn carcass of a deer while crouched over it. However, it was the head that crushed my heart. It was a terrifyingly perverse combination of wolf and man. It possessed a dog's pointed ears and long muzzle. However, the eyes were uncomfortably human. They were black, tiny, and full of a wild, frantic guile. The thing flinched away from my high lights, covering its face with a long, clawed hand. It emitted a wet, bubbling screech of surprise and anger instead of a howl or growl. Its movements were choppy and strangely quick as it circled around. Its jaw hung wide, exposing a pair of sharp, uneven, blood-stained teeth as it gazed into my truck's headlights. It froze there for a second, a deer in the headlights. However, this was no defenseless creature. I had just disrupted the meal of this predator. I was now able to see with my brain. I had been listening to a conspiracy show about dogmen and cryptids. It was no longer just bullshit. It was 50 feet in front of my pickup, and it was real. I didn't consider it, I responded. I hit the accelerator with my foot. The vehicle sped ahead as the Freightliner's engine screamed. All I could think to do was to run it down, to remove this impossibility from the world. It moved quickly. It gave one more cry of hatred and jumped off the road, vanishing into the darkness of the cornfields that bordered the highway and bouncing off the guardrail in one fluid bound. It had vanished. With my heart thumping so hard against my rib that I felt it may shatter, I roared past where it had been. As I went by, I dared to look at the deer carcass. It was ripped to pieces, a vicious, gory scene that described a brutal, unchecked brutality. I didn't slow down. With wary eyes, I scanned the darkness on both sides of the road as I pushed the vehicle to its utmost. Was it a singular, lone, strange creature? Or were there others? Suddenly, the cornfield appeared dangerous. An army of monsters might hide well among the tall stalks. Every shadow created by my headlights and every sound of the wind may be dangerous. I was hardly able to hold the truck upright since my hands were trembling so much. I had to tell someone. I had to alert someone. My fingers were clumsy from adrenaline as I groped for the CB radio. I turned it on. A slight solace was the familiar hiss of static. Breaker 9. Breaker 1. 9. The midnight pork chop is this. Have you a copy? Panic was hoarse-cracking in my voice. There was only static for a second. Then a faint, garbled voice crackled back. The Sandman pork chop was yours. How old are you? You sound frightened. Sandman, I'm just past mile marker 109 on I-80 heading west. I stumbled. Pay attention to me. I just noticed something on the side of the road and you won't believe it. It wasn't a person. It was a monster. A long pause ensued. The other driver might shake his head, assuming I was intoxicated or high. Pork chop, easy there. The Sandman's voice returned, tinged with laughter. You've been a bit too heavy on the white line fever. What did you observe? A UFO? No. Oh no. Listen to me, I screamed in a panicked tone. It resembled a large, slender werewolf. Panicked tone. It resembled a large, slender werewolf. It had a deer for food. I seen it firsthand. The Sandman's voice lost its humor and took on a spooky solemnity. Say again your location, driver. Mile marker 109, I said again, shakily. Just west of it. This time the ensuing silence was more profound. The Sandman's voice was low, just a whisper when he spoke again. The 109 Black Dog, what? With icy blood, I inquired. Driver, it's an old tale. We believed it was a ghost story, something to frighten the newcomers. On one section of road, a truck driver reportedly vanished years ago. They say he went insane, disappeared after wandering out into the grain. However, some truckers who travel for extended periods of time without sleep say they see him, or the tall, slender remnant of him that prowls the roads at night. A dog that is black. My head whirled. A tale of ghosts. This was not a ghost. This beast was made of solid flesh and blood. I had witnessed it. The blood had smelt to me. A voice interrupted the channel before I could reply. Growly, this one is older. No, Sandman, he is not a ghost. You'd be better off keeping your lips shut about it. There are some things that are better left by itself. Who is this? I inquired. The speaker grunted. Just a driver who knows these roads. Porkchop, you saw what you saw. Now put it out of your mind. Don't turn around and put your foot down. And keep going until you see a town's lights, no matter what you do. Do you get me? Keep going. The channel stopped working. The two voices had vanished, leaving me by myself. Once more, with my own heart thumping and the static hissing. More horrifying than the thing itself was the warning, given with such deadly conviction. This was not a chance meeting. This was a well-known occurrence, a terrifyingly authentic local tale. I followed the elderly driver's advice. With my eyes darting anxiously between the rearview mirrors and the road ahead, I pushed my Freightliner as fast as it would go. The tall stalks of the cornfield felt like jail bars pressing in on me. I had the impression that I was being hunted and observed. I pictured the thing effortlessly keeping up with my truck as it loped through the corn, its dark human eyes staring at my tail lights. All the shadows were monsters for the following hour. Each flash of light, a pair of eyes gazing. I jumped at every sound because I was so terrified. I believed I had seen it a dozen times. I caught a glimpse of movement at the edge of my headlights, a brief form in my peripheral vision. But all that was there was the whispering grain and the interminable road. Finally, I caught a glimpse of a truck stop's glow in the distance. It resembled a lighthouse of hope. My tires squealed in protest as I pulled in and parked close to the diner, which had the best lighting I could locate. My body shook with a mix of deep relief and lingering fear as I silenced the engine and sat there. That night I didn't get any sleep. I entered the diner, sat in a booth, and watched the other drivers come and depart while ordering their strongest coffee. The sight of them was reassuring. Their easy joking and rough accents served as a buffer against my memories of what I had witnessed. I wanted to tell them about the monster at mile marker 109 and to take them by the shoulders. But I kept thinking about the old driver's warning. It's preferable to leave some things alone. How would they respond? Make fun of me? Call me crazy? I remained silent. The following day, I delivered my load in Denver. I'm still in a daze. A week later, I resigned. I was no longer able to do it. The desolate darkness of the night and the isolation of the open road were too much for me to handle. I saw that thing every time I closed my eyes. Its bloodied teeth, its gaunt body, its dreadfully human eyes. I no longer drive trucks. Instead, I load them in a warehouse. I don't care that my pay has decreased. Every night, my family and I are at home. There are people, light and noise all around me. Years later, though, I still can't drive at night on a remote route. A cornfield is impossible for me to view without a chilling sense of fear. And because I'm aware that the topics they discuss, topics we write off as myths and legends, are real, I never ever tune into late-night talk radio. I am aware that the Black Hound of 109 is still prowling the desolate Midwest roadways. It is waiting, a hungry, needy beast that used to be a man. You can call me Ricky Salazar. In an old man's game, I'm a young one. The veterans like to remind me that, at 26, I'm typically the youngest driver at any given truck stop. I became a truck driver because I enjoy the romance and adventure of the wide road that you see in movies. I wanted to travel to the country and experience life as a contemporary cowboy riding a diesel-powered horse. Naturally, the truth is far less romantic. It's mostly unending asphalt, terrible coffee, and fast food. However, there are times when you feel that sense of freedom, generally in the middle of the night, as you're rolling over a huge, picturesque countryside beneath a starry sky. That is my life's work. I was transporting a bunch of equipment from Vegas to Boise while running up through northern Nevada. My favorite region of the nation is this one. They refer to it as the Lonely Triangle or the Great Basin. The terrain is a high desert with mountains, sagebrush, and wide, deserted valleys. Outside, the sky is larger than any place else. The Milky Way is also so visible at night that it appears as though you might touch it. It's a very alone but lovely place. You can spend hours behind the wheel and never see another person. I wanted to keep going to Elko, but I was worn out. The interminable straight road and the mesmerizing drone of the engine were beginning to lull me into a deadly stupor. I knew I had to stop for a few of hours. I thought that was as good a place as any after seeing a sign promoting a picturesque overlook. A modest stone wall separated the small paved pull-off from a steep drop-off into a wide moonlit valley on the highway's side. There was only one picnic table, no amenities, no lights, and a historical marker that no one ever reads. It was flawless. The desert's serene majesty surrounding me, and I felt totally alone. I parked my rig so that my driver's side window was facing the valley and backed it into the far corner of the pull-off. There was complete silence after I killed the engine. A dazzling full moon was the only source of light, casting a ghostly silver glow across the landscape. I could see the dark, craggy peaks of the mountains in the distance, as well as individual sagebrush bushes, because it was so light. For a time, I just sat there and took it all in, feeling tiny and unimportant in comparison to such vastness. It was a serene, humbling sensation. After a while, I got into the sleeper cot, set my alarm, and fell asleep, lulled by the deep calm of the night in the desert. My eyes snapped up when I was startled awake by a loud mechanical impact that seemed as though it came directly from outside my taxi. My heart was racing as I lay motionless. Since I hadn't heard an engine, my initial assumption was that another truck had pulled in and possibly collided with my rig. It was as quiet outside as it had been when I had gone to sleep. The cliffs above the road might have dropped a rock. It was possible, but the sound had been too purposeful, too harsh. With my senses sharpened, I sat up. I listened for any other sound, straining my ears. Nothing. Only the wind's faint whisper. I made an effort to convince myself that it was only a dream. It was a dream sound, yet the uneasiness was too great. I had been awakened by something. There was something outside my pickup. I swung my legs out of the berth and slipped into the driver's seat slowly and cautiously. I didn't want to be seen, so I kept the lights off. The moon shone so brightly that a faint silvery glimmer permeated the cab. I looked around the vacant pull-off through the windshield. The picnic table appeared as a shadowy figure. Like a lonesome gravestone, the historical marker stood. Nothing was there. My gaze shifted to my mirrors. All that was visible in the passenger side mirror was the dark rocks and the deserted road. My heart stopped when I bent to see in the driver's side mirror, the one facing the valley. There was a figure standing by the low stone wall just 20 feet from my truck. It had long, thin limbs that gave it a spidery, elongated appearance, and it was tall and extremely skinny. I was unable to see many details because it was silhouetted against the intense moonlight. However, its shape was essentially incorrect. Although it was humanoid, it was not a human. Its head tilted as though it were listening, and it stood motionless. I froze as my throat tightened with breath. What I was seeing was unbelievable. Was it a human? A clown attempting to frighten truckers? But for what reason would someone be out here in the middle of nowhere? As well as the form, it was too odd, too abnormal in proportion. The figure shifted. Slowly and gradually, it turned its head and stared at my truck. Then it moved forward into a slit of direct moonlight, emerging from the shadows. And I could see it plainly. It defied all reasonable understanding and was a creature of nightmares. It was a werewolf, but not the big vicious ones you see in movies. It was sleek, slender, and incredibly graceful. It had short, silky fur that glistened in the moonlight and was the color of midnight silver. Its body was an unsettling hybrid of canine and human anatomy. 2 lengthy digit-grade legs supported it. It had slender arms that culminated in long, delicate pointed black claws on the tips of the fingers. It had a wiry, slender physique that was full of muscle and sinew. What was most disturbing, though, was its head. It had big pointed ears and a long, thin snout. It was lupine. However, its face had a more refined, even aristocratic appearance and was less beastly. And its eyes, oh God. They had a delicate interior luminosity and were big and almond-shaped. They had the hue of gleaming silver and stared at me with a sharp, disturbing intelligence. The beast was not mindless. This was an observant, thinking being. A stalker was involved. It moved in the direction of my pickup once more. It moved silently and fluidly. It swung about like a feline predator. Every step was taken with purposeful accuracy. It wasn't hostile. It was not dangerous. It was interesting. With its head cocked and its glittering eyes absorbing every detail, it appeared to be scrutinizing my truck. I was immobilized by a combination of fear and amazement. I had never seen anything so beautiful and terrible as this creature. It was an ideal predator and a live representation of the desert's untamed, wild nature. It came just below my window to the side of my truck. I could have reached out and touched it since it was so close. It lightly touched the side of the cab with a long clawed hand. It was so gentle that it hardly made a sound. The thud I heard must have been this. The truck had been put to the test. Through the glass, its silver eyes met mine as it lifted its head and gazed up. Time paused. I experienced a strange and terrible comprehension of the monster, a connection to it. I perceived a deep, old intellect in its eyes instead of hatred or hunger. It was aware that I was inside. It was aware of my presence. It wasn't scared either. It seemed to be attempting to express itself to me in some way. The creature's ears twitched, shattering the moment. It looked back down the roadway as it turned its head. I heard a very faint sound, hardly perceptible. It was the sound of an engine coming up. There was another truck approaching. The animal responded immediately. It stepped back from my automobile and withdrew its hand. I will never be able to understand the final lengthy glance it gave me. The expression was one of caution, of acknowledgement, of something else. Then it turned, walked 2 short steps to the stone wall, and jumped over it with a grace that belied its bulk. It failed to climb. It soared, vanishing into the valley's shadows below. Another semi-truck blasted past my pull-off a few seconds later, briefly lighting up my cab with its headlights before continuing on its route. Its driver was totally unaware of the impossibility of what had just happened. For a long time I sat there with my mind spinning and my heart racing. It wasn't only terror that had me trembling. Something else was involved. Awe, incredulity. I received the impression that I had been given access to a hidden realm. A realm that lies in the great blank areas of the globe just outside the boundaries of our own. At last, I had the bravery to switch on my lights. Unsteady on my feet, I climbed out of the taxi. I moved to where the creature had made contact with my truck. In the thin coating of dust from the roads on my taxi has a handprint on the side. With 5 delicate fingers and the clear impression of sharp claws at the tips, it was long and slender. It was indisputable evidence that what I had witnessed was authentic. I spent the remainder of the night awake. As my mind tried to comprehend what had happened, I simply sat in my taxi and gazed out at the moonlit valley. The creature's eyes, those perceptive silver eyes, sprang to mind. The creature had not been a mindless one. It had been a silent protector of that desolate area of the desert, a stalker and an observer. It had no intention of hurting me. It had desired to see and comprehend me. With my mind 1,000,000 miles away, I delivered my load in Boise. I kept what I observed to myself. Who would trust me? They would claim that I was having hallucinations, or that I had finally succumbed to the loneliness of the road. However, I can still recall and see the faint spectral picture of a handprint on the side of my truck that I never washed. I still travel the high desert's desolate roads. I'm more conscious, yet I'm not scared. I think I'm hiding something. I am aware that we are not alone in this place. I am aware that there are creatures in the shadows that are old, strong, and lovely in their own horrifying manner. And occasionally, when I'm parked beneath a full moon at a solitary overlook, in an attempt to get another look at the silent, silvery stalker, I find myself scrutinizing the shadows. You can call me Sharon Briggs. I've been a driver for 15 years, primarily on Rocky Mountain-specific routes. I move anything that has to be moved, including produce and machine parts. The majority of people think of these mountains as a postcard, a lovely scene to gaze at while on vacation. However, you learn to respect them when you drive them for a living. You discover that beauty can quickly turn lethal. A patch of black ice on a hairpin corner, a rock slide, an unexpected snowstorm. There are 1,000 ways to die in the mountains. I believed I knew each one. I was mistaken. The Million Dollar Highway, a section of US 550 in Colorado, is where this story took place. It is well known for both its stunning vistas and the fact that it has no guardrails at all. In ideal circumstances, the drive is a white-knuckle affair. It was anything but on this specific night. The asphalt had turned into a sheet of black ice due to a horrible mix of rain and sleet that had arrived with a late spring storm. The wind threatened to push my equipment off the side of the 1,000-foot fall as it howled through the passages. Most rational drivers would have been holed up in a motel on that particular night. However, the Durango hospital was waiting, and I had a load of medical equipment that needed to be delivered quickly. With my hands gripping the steering wheel and my whole body tight, I was moving at a snail's pace. The only thing preventing me from losing my mind due to the tension was the steady slap of the wipers. There was nobody on the road. I was very isolated. In a world of raging cold darkness, there is a tiny, delicate bubble of warmth and light. Local legends are prevalent in these places. Stories from the past about skinwalkers and spirits. Miners have told tales of unusual creatures they have spotted in the deep forest. I had always written them off as stories from campfires, the result of fear and loneliness. My truck died on a particularly rough section of road, a steep bend with a sheer cliff on one side and a vertical rock face on the other. No coughing, no sputtering, no warning. The engine was roaring away 1 minute, then it was quiet. The power steering disappeared and the lights went out. The sleet pinging against the windshield and the howling of the wind were the only sounds to break the dreadful silence and complete darkness that enveloped the cab. Cold, instantaneous panic took hold of me. A total electrical malfunction. It was a death sentence in a place like this. It was impossible for any other car to see me since I was a sitting duck stuck on a blind bend. With trembling hands, I scrambled for my phone. Of course, no service. I reached inside the glove box for my emergency flashlight and turned it on. In the suffocating gloom, its beam appeared pitifully faint. My training began. Flares to alert any oncoming traffic. I had to put flares out on the road. I inhaled deeply in an attempt to slow my heartbeat. I gathered the flares, put on my bulky coat, and got ready for the storm. However, I was frozen in place when I heard a sound as my hand went for the door handle. Although it was a howl, I had never heard a sound like that before. It wasn't the scream of a coyote or wolf. It was a lengthy, guttural roar that sounded as if it had been ripped from the mountain's own throat. There was a terrifying, ruthless hunger within it. And it was near. It came from the direction I had just come from, up the road. As though it were blazing hot, I jerked my hand away from the door. My intention to light flares was immediately forgotten. I had no intention of stepping outside. Not right now. With that creature out there, no way. My flashlight beam danced anxiously around the dark cab as I clambered back into my seat. This time, the wail was closer. From down the road in the direction I was going, someone else was responding to it. They caught me in the middle. My thoughts were racing. What was it? A wolf pack? A lion in the mountains? I've never heard any animal make a sound like that. The sound came from a bad dream. The ancient myths and tales that I had so readily written off suddenly reappeared, no longer appearing so ridiculous. Looking through the windshield, I tried to make out anything in the dark and swirling precipitation. Outside, the anarchy was roaring and formless. Then out of the shadows came a figure. It was heading my way down the street. A stoic black figure that appeared to be hardly impacted by the strong gusts. I initially believed it might be a human, another stranded driver. However, as it approached, its shape grew more distinct and I felt a surge of undiluted fear. It was a monster. It had thick, shaggy fur and a huge, strong physique of muscle that allowed it to move on 2 legs. Standing in the middle of the roadway was a werewolf, a real-life embodiment of myth and folklore. Its massive shoulders slumped against the storm, and it was at least 8 feet tall. It had a hideous wolf's head with pointy ears and a long snout. A subtle yellow glimmer of predatoriness gleamed in its eyes. About 30 feet from the front of my truck, it came to a stop. Its bright eyes stared at my rig while its head cocked. It was aware of my presence therein. I'm sure it could smell my terror. The sound reverberated off the granite walls, a triumphant, ravenous howl, one of those dreadful yells. I was confined, a monster, a precipitous cliff, and a dead truck. It was this. I was going to die like this. My mind was racing as I scrambled in the cab, searching for anything. A wrench, a tire iron, a weapon. But against such a creature, what good would that do? The second one showed up. From behind my pickup, it came. The figure was smaller, but no less scary. I was enclosed by them. The leader, the first creature, started to move toward my truck. It moves deliberately and slowly. This was being enjoyed. It was taking pleasure in my fear. It arrived at the cab's driver's side. I could see the individual strands of its fur matted with sleet since it was so near. The muscles beneath its hide rippled as I could see. With its hideous face inches from my window, it leaned in. It gazed into my eyes with icy, ruthless intelligence in its yellow eyes. I could see its rows of dagger-like fangs when it opened its mouth. The glass was fogged up by its hot, filthy breath. I let forth a hoarse, defenseless scream. It seems to please the monster. In a humorous, mocking gesture, it lifted a huge clawed hand and tapped on the glass. Keep tapping. It was playing tricks on me. Then there was no more playfulness. It pounded its fist on the pane with a cry of rage. Although its spiderweb the safety glass held. It yelled in frustration once more and struck it more forcefully. The glass started to give way inward. It would make its breakthrough. I pushed myself against the passenger door and scurried away from the window. I was crying because I couldn't comprehend the horror and my mind was shutting down. The being on the opposite side of the truck started beating on the glass of the passenger. I was encircled. The howling of the wind, the roaring of the creatures, and the pounding. My own particular hell was symphonized. The window on the driver's side was about to break. Through the broken glass, I could see the claws beginning to protrude. That was the end. I shut my eyes, preparing myself for the pain and tears. A fresh sound immediately broke through the confusion. My taxi was filled with a brilliant, blinding light and a loud, deafening air trumpet. I opened my eyes. A collection of from up the road headlights were shining down on us. One more truck. The logging vehicle was old and in poor condition. It wasn't slowing down, and its grill guard was acting like a battering hammer. They caught the werewolves off guard. The abrupt roar and light shielded their eyes, and they flinched. There was no swerving by the logging vehicle. It struck the lead beast squarely. The monster was flung through the air like a rag doll, its body smacking against the rock face before it collapsed in a heap on the road, and there was a horrible wet thud. The second creature screamed in sheer wrath as it saw its mate knocked down. Its claws tore at the metal of the door as it turned and sprang onto the side of the logging truck. The grizzled old man who drove the logging truck didn't even bat an eye. He had a harsh, determined expression. Scraping the thing along the granite wall, he simply continued to drive. The werewolf's mangled body fell to the road after it was ripped from the vehicle with a terrible grinding shriek. Beside my rig, the logging truck slid to a stop. Out his window, the elderly driver leaned. He glanced at me, then at the two shattered, squirming bodies on the street. "Looks like you ran into a bit of local trouble," he observed calmly, as though he had just witnessed a car crash. I was unable to talk. All I could do was stare with my mouth agape. "My radio's out, but I've got a chain," remarked the man. "Let's get you hooked up and out of here before their friends show up." Acquaintances. I felt a new wave of fear at the concept. I felt like the old man could read my thoughts. He stated, "This mountain's got teeth," with solemn dark eyes. "They're also hungry tonight. Let's go now." My dead rig was towed all the way to Durango by him. The entire time we didn't say a word. He stopped as we arrived at the town's edge. His words, "You'll be safe here." Before I could properly thank him, he unhooked the chain, nodded briefly, and turned his truck around, leaving me in the dark as he headed back up the mountain. According to the official report, my truck experienced a strange electrical malfunction, and a rock slide caused the cab damage. They weren't corrected by me. How might I describe the actual events? How could I account for the two enormous non-human bodies that vanished into thin air as the sun rose? I no longer travel at night on the $1,000,000 roadway. I just work throughout the day, and I, in a storm, never ever drive it. But sometimes I think of that old logger as the wind howls through the passes. He saved my life, but I have no idea who he was. He was a man who was aware of the darkest secrets of the mountain. A man who understood that tales are sometimes etched in blood. He continues to drive those roads. A silent protector of the howling wolf on the highway. You can call me George Atkins. I have been a long-haul truck driver for about 45 years, and I am 63 years old. For me, repetition is comforting, whether it's the recognizable rumbling of a Cummins engine, the interstate system's predictable grid, or the greasy spoon cafes that all serve the same subpar coffee. I don't have a lot of imagination. Being a pragmatic man, I trust what I can see and feel. You encounter a lot of odd stuff on the road, especially at night in my line of work. You witness vehicles traveling with their lights out. You witness people with shouting matches being pulled over in remote areas. You witness mishaps that make you queasy. You witness the strange, the depressing, and the tragic. But before that night in the Louisiana swamp, I had never witnessed anything that caused me to doubt my own sanity in all my years. Transporting a shipment of paper products from an Arkansas mill to New Orleans was a straightforward run. I've traveled that path 100 times. I was familiar with every turn, pothole, and speed bump. I was traveling along a section of US 71, a two-lane highway that passes directly through the Atchafalaya Basin. In daylight, it's a bizarre and lovely location. a realm of Spanish moss-draped cypress trees, their twisted roots vanishing into the dark, murky water. But it changes at night. It turns into a completely different planet. It's completely dark. The stench of damp earth and rot filled the air, making it heavy and dense. The frogs croaking, the swarm of insects, the sounds of the marsh, a continuous living soundtrack is produced by the splashing of invisible objects in the water. It's a spot where society seems like a thin, brittle facade, and it feels primordial and ancient. I could only see a few dozen feet ahead of me because of the dense, soupy fog that was sticking to the road and rising from the swamp well after midnight. The bayou's typical song seemed oddly quiet, and the air was abnormally motionless. My tires hissing on the damp road was the only sound. The feeling began on this particular stretch of road. At first, it was a mild sensation, like a prickling sensation on the back of my neck, similar to what happens when you suspect someone is watching you. I wrote it off as exhaustion. I was worn out. I was straining my eyes looking into the thick fog, and my thoughts were beginning to deceive me. It occurs. Finding a channel that wasn't just static, I tinkled with the radio while taking a sip of my cold coffee. The sensation remained. It became more forceful and persistent. There was a tangible feeling that an invisible intellect was watching and examining them. I looked in my mirrors by habit. The fog-covered road behind me was all that was visible in the left mirror. The swampy ditch that ran alongside the right mirror, which was inclined toward the shoulder, was a gray wall. I reminded myself that I was being silly and allowing the eerie atmosphere to affect me. I wasn't a novice scared of the dark. I was an experienced driver. I continued driving for 10 more minutes. Now the sensation of being watched was so strong that it nearly seemed like physical pressure. I couldn't get rid of it. My heart rate was gradually increasing as my eyes kept flitting to my mirrors. Then I noticed it. It was in the mirror on the right. In the fog there was a glimmer of movement. It moved in the ditch next to the road, a dark form low to the ground. Initially I thought, alligator. They grow large here, and they don't hesitate to approach the road. However, the shape was incorrect. It was moving too quickly, it was too big, and it was coated in what appeared to be fur or hair. I was always performing at a 55, and it was effortlessly keeping up with me. I tried to gain a better view by leaning closer to the window, but the fog was too dense. It was only a dark smear against the gray, a blur of motion. It would briefly vanish into the mist, then resurface, constantly present and always moving at the same speed, a wild hog and a deer. No, the motion was too smooth and rapacious. It had a strong cadence that spoke of extraordinary speed and endurance, and it moved with a scary loping gait. I felt a chilling knot of dread grow in my stomach. This was incorrect. This is not what animals do. They don't spend miles pacing a 40-ton vehicle. I depressed the accelerator and accelerated. In protest, my rig's engine rumbled as it raced forward. I observed the mirror. The shape dropped behind for a moment. A rush of relief washed over me. I had outrun it, and it was only an animal. But then it came back. Now it was nearer, its shape a little clearer. It had a long, strong body and was running on all fours. It had dark, thick, shaggy hair that appeared to be matted and twisted with swamp detritus and muck. I had never seen a creature with no name in any biology book, and it was a hideous, terrible animal. My ribs were being pounded by my heart. I grasped the driving wheel with sweat-slick palms. This isn't possible. It was a trick of the gloom and the weary mind, a hallucination. I blinked hard in the hopes that the picture would disappear. It didn't. I could still see the hairy creature in my rear-view mirror, its strong legs spinning, its unrelenting pace. I made the decision to try something new. I reduced my speed. The truck started to slow down as I gradually removed my foot from the pedal. I was curious to see what it might do. I wanted it to come out on its own. Desperate to make sense of what I was seeing, I made a foolish and careless decision. The thing slowed along with my automobile. It stayed out of sight, hovering just beyond the fog's edge, a menacing, ominous shape. I reduced my pace even further, going from 30 to 20 mph. The thing kept up with me exactly. It was playing tricks on me. It had intelligence. It was manipulating the interaction since it knew I was seeing it. After that, it did something that chilled me to the bone. It started to approach. In the dim light of my taillights, its shape became more distinct as it came out of the ditch and onto the road shoulder. It was enormous, much larger than I had thought. It had a gorilla-like build, with long muscular arms and incredibly strong shoulders. However, it moved low to the ground, much like a dog. Its head was lowered, and I could only make out the mass of dark, shaggy hair covering its entire body rather than its face. It was now only a few feet away from my trailer's edge. Over the hum of my engine, I could hear it. Its deep guttural breathing and the gentle repetitive thump of its claws on the damp asphalt were audible to me. A ragged, slimy sound, full of a terrifying endurance. I'd seen enough. This was not a delusion. It was right outside my truck, and it was a living hell. I pressed the accelerator hard. The vehicle lurched forward and roared. I thought the thing would fall back and disappear into the gloom. No, it wasn't. The thing accelerated as my truck roared ahead. It was quite quick. It leaped and made a series of strong leaps to close the remaining gap. A huge, deafening thump came from the rear of my trailer. I had it on my pickup. I felt a rush of sheer, unadulterated panic. I began to swerve the truck from side to side, causing the trailer to swing alarmingly and the tires to scream in protest. It was scuttling on the trailer's roof, and I could hear its claws shredding and scraping the aluminum. The thing was moving forward. The cab was on its way. "Leave! Leave my truck!" I let out a terrified scream into the empty taxi. It was a dark, hunched bulk that was creeping over the top of the trailer as I peered in my mirror. With its lengthy arms dragging its enormous body forward with scary strength and speed, it resembled a monster ape. It would be on top of my cab in a matter of seconds. The roof would be torn through. It would affect me. I had nowhere to go. In a panic of terror, my mind clung to one final desperate thought. A bridge was in sight. I was familiar enough with the road to recognize the ancient, narrow concrete bridge that went across a bayou that was deep black. The sides were solid concrete, but there wasn't much clearance. I prayed for the bridge to appear as I floored it, keeping my eyes fixed on the road ahead. I could hear the scrabbling sound on my roof becoming closer. Its low, rumbling sound of sheer predatory hunger was now audible to me. Then I noticed it. The bridge's concrete rails protruded from the mist. I had no time to reflect. I simply did it. I managed to keep the vehicle as near the middle of the road as possible. Then I wrenched the wheel hard to the right as my rig's front touched the bridge. My truck's passenger side crashed into the bridge's concrete railing. It was a deafening impact, a screech of shredding metal, high-pitched and grinding. The entire rig trembled harshly, and I was flung up against my door. I struggled to maintain control so the truck wouldn't jackknife or go over the side. A wet, sickening crunch and a high-pitched, unearthly howl of anguish and wrath replaced the scraping sound coming from my roof. The creature's body was wedged between the top of my trailer and the concrete bridge when I looked in my mirror and witnessed it being scraped off the roof. After being flung from the truck, its shattered body tumbled through the air and over the bridge's side, vanishing into the dark water with a slight splash. Below, I continued. I didn't even reduce my speed. With my foot smashed to the ground, I continued driving after dragging the wrecked vehicle back into my lane. My mind was a blank slate of fear as I drove with a single, desperate focus. I continued until I noticed the first signs of a town, a tiny, quiet area with one all-night petrol station. My hands were shaking so much that I was barely able to turn off the ignition when I pulled in. I remained there for a long time, feeling old and hollow as the adrenaline gradually faded. After a while, I stepped outside to examine the damage to Loon. My truck and trailer were a twisted, mangled mess on the passenger side. The trailer's roof was ripped and gouged, and clumps of coarse, dark, bloody hair were lodged in the ripped aluminum. I was asked what had happened by the young, wide-eyed petrol station worker. I informed him that I had fallen asleep while driving and had scraped a bridge. He glanced at the blood and the hair before turning back to me. His face was pale and scared, and he stopped asking questions. That run to New Orleans was never completed. Using a payphone, I called my dispatcher and informed him that I had been in an accident and was leaving. I never drove a truck again after selling the rig for junk and returning to Arkansas by bus. After 45 years of traveling, it all came to an end in a single night of unimaginable horror. I currently reside in a tiny flat. I rarely leave the house, especially at night. I can still smell the swamp on some nights when the air is humid and heavy. The sound of claws on metal is still audible to me, and it's still visible in my back. A black, hairy creature called a view mirror was following me into the fog, a nameless, unrelenting terror from the bayou's center. Everyone on the road calls me Mac, even though my name is Marvin Dorsey. My 1998 Mac Titan, which I have completely customized, is a true beast of a truck. She is my joy and pride. I'm naturally skeptical. After 25 years of driving these roads, I've heard every rumor, tall tale, and ghost story the roads have to offer. Over Area 51 UFOs. Lonely roads with phantom headlights. West Virginia's Mothman. All of them have made me chuckle, and I have heard them all. To me, these were merely stories, means for lonely guys to kill time, and a way to label the weird emotions that come from spending too much time alone in the dark. I was a believer in road hypnosis, poor wiring, and the consequences of excessive caffeine. I didn't think monsters existed. I lived in a world of steel, diesel, and reason. I was transporting a tanker load of crude oil from North Dakota's fields to a refinery in Texas while running cross-country. It's a lengthy, dull trip across a deserted, windswept countryside with primarily straight lines. I listened to the radio to kill time. Late-night chat shows, not music. I adore how strange it is. The people that call in with their ecstatic tales of Sasquatch sightings and alien kidnappings. It is purely amusing. I was listening to a show about trucker folklore on this specific night. The host was discussing a mythology about a creature known as the diesel werewolf that I had never heard of before. According to the account, it was the ghost of a truck driver who, like me, had perished in a violent collision while transporting a tanker. According to the narrative, the diesel and the anger of his own demise had now merged with his spirit. He was a huge werewolf-like creature that stalked the desolate highways of the oil sector. Its eyes burned like brake lights, and its fur was permanently stained black with diesel and oil. According to the narrative, it was attracted to the smell of diesel, and, in a fit of jealous wrath, it preyed on other drivers. As I listened, I laughed. The story was excellent. It was evocative and incredibly specific. A werewolf soaking in diesel. You have to respect the ingenuity. I sipped my coffee and said to myself, pure bunk. I felt safe and confident in my logical, monster-free universe. In hindsight, the irony is nearly excruciating. My truck began acting strangely about an hour later, somewhere in the bleak Oklahoman panhandle. There was a little hesitancy at first, a lurch in the engine's beat. I scowled. I loved my Mac dearly. I kept it up myself. I never had any problems with it. I looked at my gauges. Everything appeared to be typical. It was a comfortable temperature. The oil pressure remained constant. The stuttering worsened, but I wrote it off as a little poor gasoline. The engine lost power and started to cough and spit. My knuckles were white on the steering wheel as I urged it along. An increasing sensation of dread took the place of my previous smugness. It was at least 50 miles to the closest settlement. In the middle of nowhere, breaking down with a full tanker of my worst-case scenario was crude oil. The engine died with one more violent shudder. It was a deafening hush. My truck, my dependable strong Mac, coasted to a rest on the deserted highway shoulder. In the water, I was dead. I tried turning on the ignition. Nothing. Not even the engine would start. The battery was in good condition. The engine was gone, but the light was still functional. For a while, I sat there and cursed my bad fate. I gathered my tools and flashlight, ready to go outside and have a look, but I had a bad feeling that this was something that I couldn't solve with a wrench and a little know-how. I was reaching for the doorknob when I noticed an odd odor. It smelled strongly like diesel gasoline and burning oil. I took a whiff of the air. It came from outside, and it was powerful. I assumed I must be leaking. That might have been the cause of my engine's issues. As soon as I got out of the taxi, the scent became stronger, almost overwhelming. My eyes watered from the vile chemical stench. In search of a puddle, which would indicate a leak from my own tanker, I shone my flashlight on the ground. I didn't see anything. The odor was merely in the air. I went to my truck's front end and unlatched the hood. I focused my light on the enormous engine, which is my haven of reason and mechanics. Nothing seemed glaringly wrong to me. There are no loose wires, broken belts, or leaky indications. I couldn't understand. I heard the sound at that moment. The snarl appeared to come from the shadows behind me, low and guttural. My hand was on the warm engine as I froze. It wasn't a coyote or dog growling. It had a mechanical rattling sound, like metal grinding on metal, and was deeper and more resonant. With my flashlight beam making a jittery path through the darkness, I gently straightened up and turned around. Who is present? In the immense vacuum, my voice sounded thin and little as I screamed out. The snarling ceased. The wind's whisper was the sole sound. It was my imagination, I reassured myself. The breakdown has already caused my mind to become tense, producing phantom sounds. Just as I turned back to the engine, I noticed them. About 100 yards down the road, there are two spots of light that glow in the darkness. They resembled the smoldering embers of a fire in their dull, enraged redness. My initial assumption was that it was another car's taillights. However, they were too low to the ground and too near to one another. They were also in motion. They were moving in my direction. As the two red lights approached, I was transfixed. They weren't lights. They were eyes. They were also part of something larger. As it entered, my blood froze in the dim ambient illumination of my truck's danger lights. The legend, the radio broadcast, was real. The figure in front of me was an exact replica of the terrifying tale I had been laughing at an hour ago. It was a werewolf, but an industrial werewolf with a twist. It was a massive mass of muscle and fury, standing on two strong digitra legs. Its shaggy, thick fur was matted and a dark, iridescent black, as though it had been soaked in crude oil. It was emitting the same chemical odor I had previously detected, a poisonous aura that pervaded the surrounding atmosphere. Although its features were pitted and scorched as though from a fire, its head was a huge wolf's head. Its teeth were the black of charred metal, not the white of bone. The most horrifying aspect of it was its eyes. They were filled with an unquenchable, raging fury and radiated a dull, red interior light like to a ghost truck's brake lights. It was standing there staring at me with bright crimson eyes, its chest rising and falling with every desperate, rattling breath. It was observing me with more than just a predator's hunger. It was staring at me with intense personal loathing and envious wrath. It seemed to view my life, my truck, and me as an affront to its own wretched, doomed existence. My sensible world, my rationality, my doubt, all of it vanished in a moment, to be replaced with an untainted, primordial fear that I had never imagined was possible. I was trapped, without a weapon, and confronted by a mythology that had just turned out to be terrifyingly real. With my feet tripping on the soft gravel of the shoulder, I began to gently back away. The creature matched my retreat by taking a stride forward and letting out another of its mechanical grinding groans. It wasn't rushing. It was relishing my fright. I retreated until I was up against my own truck's grill. There was nowhere else for me to go. They were only a few feet from the thing now. The stench was strong, a sickening combination of oil, diesel, and charred flesh. Its body was emitting heat, and I could feel it. It held up a huge clawed hand with long black talons that were oozing with a viscous oil. It leaned out to touch my truck rather than assault me. With a delicate shrieking caress, it moved its claws along the chrome grill. It was an act of ownership and possession. It seemed to be claiming my life and my automobile as its own. Its crimson eyes then turned back to face me. In a quiet growl, its oily black lips peeled back. It was done in order to play with me. I was going to die from it. An adrenaline rush of unwavering, stubborn wrath sliced through that instant. Through my fear. My truck was not going to be taken by this monster, this ghost, or this creature. My life was not going to be lost. This was my rig, and I was M. Dorsey. I took the only action that sprang to mind. I scurried along the side of my vehicle, dived under the creature's outstretched arm, and dragged myself up into the cab. My heart thumping against my ribs, I shut the door and pressed the lock. The creature pounded its fist against the driver's side window and let out a yell of frustrated rage. Though it trembled, the glass held. The whole cab shook from the impact as it pounded repeatedly. I pushed myself against the back wall as far away from the windows as I could and clambered over the center console and into the sleeper berth. For a while, the pounding ceased. A frightful quiet fell. Then a new sound, a rending, tearing sound, came to me. It originated on the roof. The beast was attempting to rip its way inside my truck after climbing on top of it. As its claws tore at the roof, I could hear the metal shrieking and moaning. It was this. A monster started opening the metal box in which I was imprisoned like a can of sardines. I closed my eyes and prepared to die. Then a miracle. The sound of a vehicle and engine approaching from down the highway. My roof's shredding noise ceased. The beast jumped out of my truck with a loud thump. As I clambered back into the driver's seat, I noticed another semi's headlights coming up. With its back to me, the monster stood in the center of the road, staring at the truck that was approaching. It roared in defiance, as though it owned this section of the roadway. Rather than slowing down, the other truck accelerated and honked. In a demonstration of haughty strength, the diesel werewolf remained motionless. It prepared for the shock. It was struck head-on by the other truck, a huge Kenworth. The sound of metal striking an unfathomably hard object was a horrible exploding crunch. The creature's body tumbled through the air and landed in a heap on the roadside after being flung backward. The Kenworth slid to a stop, its front end destroyed. The driver, a tough, determined-looking woman, leaped out and hurried to my taxi. She shouted, "Are you okay?" over the boom of her own engine, her voice hardly audible. I was unable to speak and could only nod. She glanced at the creature's rumpled body before turning back to face me. With a tone of wonder and fear in her voice, she remarked, "I thought they were just stories. The old-timers have told me about it, but I never trusted them." For a little while, we were two truckers linked in an unthinkable event. Then there was a deep grinding sound that we heard. The animal was in motion. It was rising. It was pushing itself to its feet despite having a twisted and damaged body. Its fiery, blazing eyes stared at us with a look of homicidal rage. She shouted, "Get in your truck!" Now, we each clambered back into our own taxis. I was still unable to start my engine. Without hesitation, the woman shifted her twisted rig into reverse, slid behind my tanker, and began to shove me. As a bizarre, crippled caravan running from a nightmare, we traveled for miles in that manner. Expecting to see those two red eyes following us, I kept checking my mirrors, but nothing was there. Only the dark, deserted road. At last we arrived at a truck stop. We didn't discuss the incident. We didn't need to. We simply had a silent understanding while sharing a pot of coffee. By some miracle, the engine of my truck started up immediately. It seemed as though the only thing preventing it had been the creature's evil presence. I no longer find the ghost stories funny. Knowing that the world is a far wilder and more dangerous place than I ever imagined makes me listen to them with a new respect and a new fear. I am aware that reason and reasoning are flimsy defenses against evil, and I am aware that a creature created out of fire and anger still roams the desolate highways of the oil patch, its eyes burning like brake lights and its fur smeared with diesel, haunting the night for eternity. Oscar Malloy is my name, but on the CB, people call me Red, mainly because of my blazing red hair and my correspondingly hot temper from my youth. My favorite routes have always been those that lead me into the untamed countryside, and I have been transporting freight for about 30 years. I was raised as a hunter. I feel more at home in the woods than in any metropolis, having spent my childhood tracking deer and elk in Montana's highlands. My truck serves only as a means of transportation between wilderness areas. I've witnessed bears that would break the heart of a city dweller, the largest bucks, and the most magnificent bull elk. I believed I was familiar with every animal that lived on the continent of North America. I was a fool. This specific incident happened in the dead of winter a few years ago. I was running in the Idaho. The Panhandle is a rocky, densely wooded area, renowned for its wealth of wildlife. Ironically, I was transporting a cargo of lumber from a mill close to Curtin to a Spokane building site. Although it was a short, well-known route, a terrible blizzard had come in and covered a foot of snow in a matter of hours. I-90 was momentarily closed, and the major roadways were in disarray. I chose to take a detour, a state highway that I knew wound through the Kiksu National Forest, so I wouldn't be stranded. I knew the road, I had my chains on, and it was risky. I thought I might be able to. The snow changed the landscape of the forest. The world was silent and white as the enormous pine and fir trees, with their limbs bent low, were loaded with it. The only sounds were the low roar of my engine and the crunch of my chains on the packed snow as the thick, heavy snow continued to fall. It was strikingly, frighteningly gorgeous. It was a fresh, clean, and completely empty world. Since leaving the main road, I hadn't seen another car. I initially believed it to be a poacher, but it was growing dark, the light fading into a deep, bruised purple. About 200 yards ahead, a figure was pulling something out of the woods on the side of the road. It was a large man wearing what appeared to be bulky, dark winter clothing. He was removing a big doe's carcass, its dark blood a startling splash of color against the snow's pristine whiteness. Anger was my initial response. The season had ended. Simply put, this was poaching, and it was really haughty of them to be doing it so blatantly on the side of the road. I reduced the speed of my truck. I wanted to get a good look at the man, report him to the Fish and Game Department, and possibly grab his license plate if he had a car parked close by. But as I drew nearer, the scene specifics began to seem off. The man was enormous, far larger than the average individual. His shoulders were really wide. Even with his heavy clothes and the manner he was handling the deer, his frame was enormous. He wasn't using a rope to pull it. It was thrown across his shoulder. A fully developed doe can weigh more than 150 pounds. A truly superhuman strength would be needed to carry it like that through deep snow. I was now approximately 50 yards away. My headlights illuminated the scene as my truck crawled along, piercing the falling snow. As though he could sense my approach, the man paused and turned. He stepped to his full height and dumped the deer into the snow. and my world, which I believed to be very familiar, collapsed. It wasn't a male. The object that was standing along the road was a monster. The creature was a werewolf. It was a mythical creature, as real as the vehicle I was driving, standing there in the pouring snow. Even through its coarse gray and black fur, its massive torso of thick, corded muscle was obvious, making it easily 8 feet tall. Its arms, which ended in hands with long, evil-looking black claws, were as thick as tree limbs, and its legs were lengthy and strong. It had an uncanny human stance and was on 2 legs. Its long snout, speckled with the blood of the deer, resembled the head of a monster wolf. Its pointy, tall ears turned to follow the sound of my engine. What really frightened me, though, were the eyes. They weren't a mindless beast's eyes. They had a light, icy blue color and were brimming with a piercing, frigid, and completely serene intelligence. They were a hunter's eyes. This was not some vicious monster that was ravening. It was quiet. It was intentional. It had apparently just finished a successful hunt, and now I was an unwanted complication. Its face was one of chilly appraisal rather than hostility as it glanced at me and then at my truck. It was assessing me to see if I posed a threat. I froze. The portion of me that could recognize an animal by its scent, call, or trace was screaming, my hunter's mentality. It was attempting to put what I was seeing into a predetermined category. But for this, there was no box. This was not feasible. This demon prowled the deepest recesses of human terror. It stood in my headlights, too. With easy strength, it stooped to pick up the doe once more and slung it over its shoulder as though it were weightless. It looked at me for a final time, a glance that was dismissive as well as cautionary. "This is my forest," the expression conveyed. "You are merely a guest. Proceed." After then, it turned and left. It failed to run. It didn't jump. It returned to the thick woods with a confident, steady stride. The trees and drifting snow swiftly engulfed its enormous bulk. It vanished in a matter of seconds. The deer's bloodied trail and a set of enormous inhuman tracks in the snow were the only signs it had ever been there. I don't know how long I sat there in my pickup. Snow was accumulating on my windshield and my engine was idling. Disbelief, fear, and a weird twisted sense of professional respect swirled through my head. I had just seen the ultimate predator in my life as a hunter, a creature that is ideally suited to its surroundings, an expert in its field. With trembling hands and a numb head, I finally shifted the truck into drive and continued driving. The poacher was not reported by me. Who should I tell about it? How would I respond? "Hi there, game and fish." For hunting during the off-season, I would want to report a werewolf. I would have been imprisoned. In a few days, I arrived in Spokane, dropped off my load, and went back to Montana. I saw the world differently today. There was a new and terrible depth to the woodlands that I had always considered to be my playground and haven. Bringing my rifle into the woods had always made me feel like the top of the food chain. I was convinced now that I wasn't, and that made my bones tingle. Out there was something more powerful, quicker, and far more dangerous. I continue to hunt. I'm born with it. However, I now do it in a different way. I'm more circumspect. I focus more on the quiet in between the noises. I search for tracks that aren't there. I don't feel like the hunter anymore. I feel as though I'm an outsider intruding in someone else's kingdom. This is a story I've never told anyone. It's my burden, my secret. However, there are moments when I feel like I'm being watched while I'm in the middle of the woods and the snow is falling. And in my imagination, I see a set of icy blue, icy intelligent eyes. The eyes of the huntsman werewolf, the real forest master. Additionally, I am aware that I am hunting within its borders, only with its consent. Hunting within its borders, only with its consent. Henry Collins is my name, or was. I no longer know who I am. A warning, a recollection, a ghost. I'm narrating this tale. I suppose I'm streaming it from another location, a space between quiet and static. For 35 years, I worked as a truck driver, a lifer. In my Peterbilt, a machine I knew better than my own wife, I transported chemicals primarily across the nation. I was professional, systematic, and only 2 years away from retirement. 2 years away from permanently storing the rig and fishing on a calm lake during the day. Never did I make it. A shipment of industrial solvents from a plant in rural Pennsylvania to a factory in Ohio was my most recent run. I traveled across the Allegheny National Forest, a huge, gloomy stretch of old-growth forest that engulfs the highway for miles. I had driven past the area 1,000 times, but the jungle chose to claim me on that last night. This is not your typical narrative. Years later, when I'm in a safe apartment or a warm cafe, I can't tell you. Either it happened then, or it is happening today. The timeline isn't working. I can only know it because of the way it was captured in the panicked, frightened transmissions I made on my CB radio. The recordings were discovered from my wrecked setup in my last moments. The corporation and the authorities all wrote them off as the ramblings of a man who lost control while driving due to a heart attack or stroke. The truth was too much for them to accept. However, the other drivers, who are aware of the road's darkness, are aware. The tapes were shared, and from wherever I am right now, I'm sharing it with you. My last transmission is this one. My voice was tense but crackled over the airways, controlled. Any ear on the westbound lane will receive a breaker 19. The alchemist is this person. Do you have a copy? I waited, but my engine's hum and the hiss of static were the only responses. There was no life on the road. Somebody speak to me. With a note of annoyance in my voice, I broadcast once more. Tonight, this road is dead. How about you, eastward, breaker 19? Is there anyone out there? Keep quiet. With a sound of exhausted resignation, I let out a sigh. Alchemist is in the dark, all right. I suppose it's just me and the trees. I drove silently for a few minutes while listening to the wiper's steady slap against the pouring rain. The sole business. To combat the overwhelming loneliness of the night, I started humming to myself, a tuneless song. I whispered, "Man, this is a dark one," into the phone. Tonight the moon is hiding. Nothing is visible beyond the headlights. Rain and a wall of trees. It's similar to driving through a tunnel lengthy and dark. Lost in the hypnotic rhythm of the trip, I went silent once more. Then the roar of the storm was broken by a distant, faint wail. I heard it, but it was nearly drowned out by the wind. "Whoa, what was that?" To the empty taxi, I murmured. "A huge one, I suppose, Coyote." The first howl was answered by another. This one is stronger and closer. It was clearly not a coyote, and it had a deep resonating quality. A glimmer of uneasiness replaced my nonchalant tone. I said, "Okay, that ain't no coyote," in a tight voice. Has a deeper, more wolf-like sound. Since I was a child, I haven't heard a wolf in this area. A pack must be passing through. Again, I keyed the microphone. There's an underlying sense of urgency. Here, breaker 1 is an alchemist. Somewhere around mile marker 84, I got a pack of what sound like timber wolves. Did anyone else hear that? The static hissed its apathetic response. Yes, I am talking to myself about figures. But that's another matter. A truly untamed sound. Through the night came a third howl. This one was surprisingly close. There was no call. There was a roar, a sound of unadulterated, unbridled violence. Immediately after, I heard a harsh metallic clang coming from the back of my truck. What was that, Jesus Christ? I shouted. It sounded as though the trailer had been struck. Perhaps a branch in this breeze. Now I was breathing more quickly. The roar of the engine grew louder as I accelerated. Well, there was no branch there. The alchemist is breaker 19. I require a copy. I'm traveling with something significant. My trailer was recently struck. There was quiet in response to my cries. I started talking frantically. Oh no, where is everyone? I'm at mile marker 82 on US 6 heading west in the Allegheny. There's something outside. It seems to be pursuing me. There was a loud scraping noise, and the truck's rear end's high-pitched shriek of metal hitting metal. A succession of deep, guttural growls that could be heard even over the engine accompanied it. It's on the truck, oh goodness. I let out a whine into the radio. The damn truck has it. I hear it. The tanker has it. What on earth is it? The scrapping became more furious and louder. It's going up. It is ascending the tanker's side. It's visible in my mirror. God, oh God, it's not an animal. It's a dude. It's a monster, no. God damn, that's a werewolf. I let out a sob of sheer horror. The tires squealed on the wet pavement as I violently swerved the vehicle, but it held. I'm making an effort to shake it. It's clinging. It appears to be composed of steel. The tank is being torn apart by its claws. God, I'm transporting solvents. If the tank is punctured. The roaring grew louder, and then, right above me, there was a huge, resounding thump. The cab had it. It passed directly above my head. The cab has it. It's directly overhead. Its respiration is audible. Get out! Leave my truck! The cab's roof was ripped apart with a horrifying, splintering crash. I let out a sharp, high-pitched cry of pain. The roof is where it is coming from. Its claws. They're in the taxi. I see them. They're attempting to grab me. I could hear the sound of fabric tearing as I struggled against the inevitable, along with my own moaning. No. Return. Leave me alone. The wind and rain roared into the cab, shattering the driver's side window. The window has vanished. It's attempting to enter. The face of it. God, oh God, there it is, its face. The teeth and eyes. My words turned into unintelligible cries of fear. The roar of the creature was a deafening presence all the time. As the truck doors started to give way, a high-pitched metallic groan added to the noise. It has a door. The door is being peeled open. The metal. It is similar to paper. Please, no, no, no. No, God. The metal groaned more, and then the door tore from its hinges, a final thunderous shriek of tearing steel. The universe was filled with the horrible, enraged sound of the creature's roar, which was now unhindered. I gave one more spine-tingling scream, but it was cut short in an instant. There was simply the hiss of the open CB channel and the sound of the storm for a moment. Then there was a new sound, a crunching, tearing, wet sound, the sound of feeding. With deep, contented growls interspersed, it seemed to go on forever. The feeding finally ceased. Near the microphone of the CB handset came a ragged, hard breathing. One terrifying word came from a low, guttural voice that sounded like rocks grinding together and was a warped parody of human speech. Mine. Before the transmission vanished into the icy, meaningless hiss of static, one last victorious cry reverberated, trembling the radio's speaker itself. The following morning, they located my truck. In the middle of the highway, it was jackknifed. The engine was cold. The taxi was ruined. The roof was ripped off. There was no driver's side door at all. The cabin's inside. A slaughterhouse was what it was. According to the official report, as rescue personnel were trying to remove my body, I experienced a medical emergency, lost control, and the ensuing accident caused the damage. My body was never discovered, not a trace. They claimed that before they came, an animal must have gotten to my remains. I guess they were correct about that portion. But that was not the end of my story. Here, it is imprisoned within the airwaves and wires. In the machine, I am a ghost. Repeating into the emptiness was a last desperate broadcast. My last run never ended, and I am the alchemist. Therefore, you turn off your radio if you're driving late at night on a desolate road and you hear a voice on the CB that seems a little too fearful or frantic. You stepped on the ground. Because the things that seek the dark are real, you strive for the light. I am aware. They preyed on me. Avoid letting them influence you. Their upcoming broadcast. Thank you for viewing. Tell me which of these stories chilled you the most in the comments section if you liked them. Remember to like and share with your friends and sign up for the channel for more gruesome stories. To like and share with your friends and sign up for the channel for more gruesome stories.